Hey there, pal. Heard you were looking for something of particular importance. That you was looking for some answers. Around here, we don't just give out answers for free. Furthermore, we don't like rats poking around for some cheddar, capiche? If you want some answers for your inquiries, you're gonna come with me. Now. There we go, nice and tight. Don't want you running off now. This is all completely necessary, I assure you. Boss just wants to play it safe. Now, I think I know why Hughes is here. Yes, you have come to know the full story of the boss's homeland, the Italian Social Republic. Well, don't you worry, the boss made sure we know the tale. I can explain it in detail. Just sit tight, we got all day. Okay, Europe in the 1910s. It sucked. While yes, there were plenty of technological advancements and societal progress, the continent was on the brink of the biggest war in history. Italy at that time invaded Ottoman territory in North Africa to secure Libya and expand its colonial empire, which only further raised tensions on the continent. In 1914, following the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, all-out war broke out on the continent, beginning the biggest war in human history. Italy joined the war on the side of the Entente in 1915 after being promised vital territories from Austria-Hungary. However, the Germans had anticipated the Italians joining the Entente, so the Italian front became a brutal stalemate. The Great War came to a close in 1919, but not because one side was victorious. Rather, because the participants of the war either collapsed or experienced drastic regime changes. Italy, unfortunately, would be one of the countries to go through a violent breakup after the Great War ended with no definitive victor. The Marxists, led by Benito Mussolini, would stage a coup in the north. However, their regime quickly became unpopular after Mussolini initiated the Red Terror, which had massive consequences that would end up causing the collapse. After the Great War, the well-known soldier and poet, Gabriele D'Annunzio, would at first be sympathetic to Mussolini's Red Republic. However, he quickly saw that the National Marxists were nothing but tyrants. Innocent workers who the socialists claimed to represent would be murdered, imprisoned, or given some other punishment. Food was only given to people the government liked, which pissed off a huge chunk of the populace. The tyranny of the Reds would be why D'Annunzio brought 20,000 legionaries together to march on Rome. D'Annunzio had been able to gain a large support base, allowing for his Promethean Syndicalist legions to seize Rome and the surrounding area. The march on Rome was successful, allowing D'Annunzio to establish a provisional government ruled by the Legion. The Italian Civil War since then has become a stalemate, since Italy no longer had any resources left due to the Great War, and all sides needed a moment to replenish their forces. The unofficial peace will only last for about one more year, so we need to use that time wisely. Although we control the heart of Italy, Rome, we don't control much else. This is going to be an uphill battle, made even harder by the fact that I decided to do this path on the veteran difficulty instead of regular difficulty like usual. For that reason, we need to prepare as best as we can for the inevitable unification of Italy. Let me tell ya, you don't gotta fight a war with just guns and fists, no. Messing with the enemy is just as important. In the art of war, Sun Tzu said, "The whole secret lies in confusing the enemy so that he cannot fathom our real intent." That's why the first thing we did was make it seem as if some Reds faced death by pasta. That ought to throw them off. On a more serious note, we conducted raids into monarchist lands to try stealing shit, but this was largely ineffective. I also settled on a simple template I would be using to reunite Italy. It's pretty shit, but all things considered, it's good enough. We can make it good when we unite Italy. While I was constructing forts on the front lines, I was given the news that the Mystic Legion, led by Julius Evola, was up to no good. They're esotericists, to put it simply. He is somewhat relevant in legionary politics. However, if he takes over Italy, it can be guaranteed that something bad will happen. So we must ensure our leadership remains stable. We must ensure we remain united, for the Legion is Italy's last hope. We may have one of the weakest positions on the peninsula, but against all odds, we will rise. While the Legion is indeed nationalistic, it will not persecute people willing to fight for it. That is why we decided to absorb disillusioned soldiers from the Reds. We need all the men we can get, since although Rome is the heart of Italy, it and the surrounding area don't have much manpower for us to utilize. Well, we did kick out monarchist sympathizers. We're not that desperate, come on. I was trying to increase production at all costs, as the Legion's starting industry is incredibly tiny. I needed a lot of guns and artillery, not just for new legions, but also to have a stockpile so I can keep up an offensive. Covertly raiding the Reds did help, but only by a little. D'Annunzio decided to test the monarchist troops in a border clash. The clash ended up being a defeat for us, but I chalked it up to the monarchists being able to take advantage of how border clashes work in Hoi 4. Despite the clash failing, D'Annunzio's advisors urged him to begin working on the second Risorgimento, believing that if we take too long, then the Reds will strike while we are unprepared. D'Annunzio decided to listen and began the final preparations for the upcoming wars. Many in the Legion wanted us to go to service by requirement, but since I was playing on veteran difficulty, I didn't think it would be worth it, considering the output debuffs. After putting out nationalist propaganda, D'Annunzio concluded he could wait no longer, and that the second Risorgimento had to begin now. It was important to expand as soon as possible because we are too weak in our current position to stand up to Mussolini's Marxists. Our options were the Kingdom and the Socialists. After considering both, D'Annunzio decided that the Kingdom was the weaker target, so he ordered the legions to march south and seize Naples. Our armies were pretty equally matched, so it was going to take some time to get a breakthrough. But luckily, the French state was sending us volunteers and equipment, so we had an advantage over the Kingdom. Still, we had to resort to suicide charging the monarchist front line to get a breakthrough. We entered the city of Naples, but the Kingdom just fell back to another town. I had to stretch the front line pretty thin, but it was a risk worth taking as we cut off the town of Chieti and the units inside of it. The Kingdom couldn't afford to lose more units, so our advance began picking up speed. We got another pocket and soon after, captured the last victory point, forcing the Kingdom to surrender. As we expand, we need to spend plenty of political power to integrate the new lands. However, we also need to decide on the fate of the Kingdom of Italy's leadership. Victor Emmanuel III may have been able to flee when Mussolini couped the government in 1919, but he has failed to escape this time. To make sure the monarchists never posed a threat again, we executed the entire House of Savoy. Keeping up with the momentum, we attacked the Mafia in Sicily. However, due to the corridor leading to Sicily being so tight, breaking through was going to be nearly impossible. Luckily, we previously took over several chunks of the old Italian navy, so we could launch an amphibious landing behind the Mafia's riflemen. The naval invasion worked better than I could have expected. The naval invading infantry captured Messina, fully encircling the entire Mafia army in Reggio di Calabria, meaning we could enter Palermo uncontested. Even though we defeated the Mafia, the local police are still in the hands of the Mafia. The pre-existing police in Sicily had to be replaced with legionary police that is run by a commissar chosen by D'Annunzio. You know how I said we executed the royal family? Technically, that's not true, as a small piece of it was in the vassal of Sardinia when the Kingdom of Italy capitulated. We will rectify our mistake and destroy Sardinia now before they can form a bigger army. We swiftly landed on the island and overran the royalist remnants. With Sardinia brought under Legion control, we now have full control over southern Italy. This means we can now turn our attention to the north, where the Reds have also been on the move. The socialist movement is not united, as anarcho-syndicalists also broke off from Mussolini's socialist government. That conflict has stalled, but the Reds are likely going to win. If we intervene now, we can create an unwinnable two-front war for the Reds, and create a bond with the anarcho-syndicalists, who are actually not too different from us. After some extra preparation, namely deploying 10 more legions, I declared war on the Reds. The socialists were pretty strong, but our forces had much better tactics, allowing us to make gains. We made steady gains against the Reds, advancing along the coastline. This strategy would be what secured our victory. Since we advanced along the coast, the Red forces were forced to defend in the undersupplied mountains. Our forces were able to link up then, trapping a dozen socialist soldiers, ending any chance of a socialist victory. As we began pacifying the troops stuck in the mountains, our legions entered Genoa. They fell back to Savona, so we followed them into the city and captured that city too. But despite taking Savona and crushing the last of the socialists in the mountains of Tuscany, they still didn't surrender. Ultimately, we had to occupy every single tile for the Italian Socialist Republic to finally surrender to us and the anarcho-syndicalists. Although the anarcho-syndicalists had been fighting the Reds for longer, we actually managed to get all the land in the peace deal because we killed more soldiers. Anyway, the next target on the agenda was the anarcho-syndicalists. However, we didn't need to invade them. Our ruling party is the Italian Syndicalist Legion, which, as you may have guessed, prioritizes the trade unions. Yes, we are nationalists, but our core values are quite similar. That's why D'Annunzio suggested they join us peacefully. They accepted, presumably because the war with the Reds left them incredibly weak, with all their units being at half strength, meaning they would immediately collapse if they said no. Plus, the trade unions remain a priority, so there's little to lose by saying no. Now that the anarcho-syndicalists have joined us, the last warlord to be brought to heel was the Venetians. We gave them an ultimatum, and they refused to join us. Utilizing our special forces, we captured the border city of Verona, and after that, the Venetian frontline collapsed, leading to the fall of Venice. They surrendered soon after, and we annexed the land. With the fall of Venice, D'Annunzio could declare the Second Risorgimento completed. However, the Legion's story is only getting started. D'Annunzio has plans to go beyond Italy's current borders. However, there's a lot he has to do first. A new permanent Italian government needs to be established, the economy needs to be rebuilt, and our military needs drastic reforms. Now, considering everything D'Annunzio has accomplished, you might think he'd be able to do anything he wants. However, there is another very influential man in the Legion who has a chance to usurp power from D'Annunzio. This guy, Marinetti, is the leader of the Futurist movement. He and his followers joined the Legion during the initial collapse of Italy, due to D'Annunzio's movement being actually pretty inclusive of other groups. Futurism is the violent rejection of tradition and the advocacy for mass industrialization and modernization. Promethean syndicalism is the main ideology of the Legion, but the Futurists had become very well known, especially among less progressive groups. D'Annunzio was aware that Marinetti's influence was too high to be ignored. However, outright killing Marinetti was out of the question, as it could cause a new Italian civil war. The only solution was to challenge Marinetti to a series of debates in the fourth session of the Arengo, our parliament. For either D'Annunzio or Marinetti to win the Arengo, they need a definitive majority. If neither of them gets a majority, a third unstable candidate will emerge from the shadows, which we cannot have. The Arengo began, and D'Annunzio easily swept the debates. This is because Marinetti's total rejection of tradition in favor of forced industrialization made him pretty unpopular with a lot of people. Forced industrialization was believed to do more harm than good, and with an unstable economy, forced industrialization would ruin our production even more. Additionally, his rejection of sexual liberty and other various freedoms pushed for by D'Annunzio made him look like an old, out-of-touch weirdo. D'Annunzio swept the debates, and by the time the Arengo was finished, D'Annunzio had maintained a mandate and could proceed with his vision for Italy. With power now firmly in his hands, D'Annunzio announced the Charter of Rome, a political and social reform plan. Italy would be modernized and turned into the ideal nation of D'Annunzio. However, before he went any further, he knew he needed to do something about the opposition. For Marinetti, he could easily be appeased with additional research funding for the modernization of our state. For Julius Evola and his Mystic Legion, however, they had to be assassinated. The threat he posed was far too great. His esoteric ideas would be the death of Italy as a whole if they came to fruition. He has to die, there's no other option. With the opposition handled at varying levels, Gabriele D'Annunzio proclaimed the Italian Social Republic, the new permanent Italian government. The people cheered for the victory of Promethean syndicalism against the old monarchs and tyrannical Marxists. However, there is much to be done. Thankfully, now that the Social Republic has been declared, D'Annunzio can proceed with his plans. Completely fulfilling D'Annunzio's plan to make Italy a super progressive state will be expensive and time-consuming, so we have to do it gradually. Still, we could get started now by banning the use of the crucifix in schools and sponsoring state art festivals, since D'Annunzio believes the arts are one of the fundamental pillars of Italian culture. With his initial reforms done, he moved to the economy. The economy needed to be restructured from the ground up, as the national economy was destroyed by the reunification wars. D'Annunzio enforced a bunch of laws to stop the worst of the economic problems, which included introducing autarky and distributing malaria vaccines due to a recent outbreak. All initial economic reforms, combined with other progressive policies enacted by D'Annunzio, were able to get us out of the worst of the economic problems. With the worst problems out of the way, we needed to settle on a proper economic policy. D'Annunzio believed that corporatism was the best choice, as he believed it would work best with Promethean syndicalism and progressivism. Part of his corporatism included a policy on industrialization. Marinetti wanted forced industrialization, but that would make our economic situation even worse. That is why D'Annunzio decided to instead pursue state-guided industrialization across Italy, as he believed more regular industrialization would be far less harmful than the shock therapy that Marinetti wanted. We made education free for everyone under 18, which will make it easier for us to get more workers who can make Italy an industrial giant. D'Annunzio then instated a welfare system to drastically improve the quality of life for the Italian people. To pay for the services provided by welfare, he instated a progressive tax. If the money the people paid in taxes went back to them in the form of welfare services, then they'll realize taxation is not theft. All services will be granted, and there will be no rationing. D'Annunzio's reforms would be enough to declare the economic problems over, allowing us to expand our research and development. Now that the economy has completely recovered, D'Annunzio can fully focus on political and social changes. I believed it was important to get the economy back on track first, because a good economy means the people will be able to enjoy their lives at home. And if the people are enjoying their lives, then they'll have no reason to object to D'Annunzio's reforms. We nationalized all industries because that's a political focus for some reason. And we officially ousted the clerics, for they are tumors of a long-gone, unglorious Italy. We then introduced a pseudo-federalism of some sort, which also boosted our factory output. The extra factory output is going to come in handy since I finished designing my tank template and have begun training some tanks, and I'm going to need the equipment. Workplace democracy was also implemented to make production even faster. We even went as far as to establish gender equality. All these reforms allowed D'Annunzio to officially make the Charter of Rome part of the Constitution of the Italian Social Republic. We even proposed direct regional democracy while also further empowering D'Annunzio for some reason. Getting mixed messages here, but who really cares? By now, I had decided that we had focused on internal politics more than enough. We need to begin looking outside of Italy. Our nationalist ambitions haven't been fulfilled. If you ignore our lack of colonies, we only have Italy's pre-World War I lands. That has to change. D'Annunzio is an Italian nationalist. He firmly supported Italian irredentism, and it's time to begin working on fulfilling it. Although there are still some internal reforms for us to push through, the big reason we need to pivot to building a new Italian sphere is that the Balkans have been on fire for the past decade. The Third Balkan War destabilized the war-torn region even further, and the Fourth Balkan War has caused even more damage. Now the Serbs and Greeks have almost achieved full control over the subcontinent, which is bad because the Balkans are where our primary ambitions lie. That is why we must begin expanding now. Gabriel D'Annunzio announced the formation of an Italian alliance, the Popular League. There were calls in the Arengo for us to merge the Popular League into the French States Alliance, the axis of reaction. The idea was to thank France for their aid during the Second Risorgimento by joining their alliance. However, D'Annunzio decided against this because he believed that Italy would be overshadowed by France. Additionally, they were highly reactionary in comparison to Italy. It was for that reason that he rejected France outright, opting to maintain the Popular League as its own faction. D'Annunzio ordered the armed forces to move to the border with Austria to prepare for an intervention. D'Annunzio wanted to expand into Austria because Austria holds Italian claims, and it would serve as a good buffer against the Germans, who had been unified by the Schutzstaffel under Heinrich Himmler. However, Austria was already fighting the Danubian Soviets and the Second Balkan League, led by Serbia. If we wanted anything out of Austria, we had to step in now. We declared war on the Austrians, hoping to be able to seize both it and our territorial claims. However, we hadn't actually reformed the military that much. Although our doctrines and division templates had been modernized, the High Command was still pretty dated, so it needed to be restructured while we were at war. We managed to secure Tyrol and Trentino, but after that our offensive slowed down. I tried to break the stalemate by bringing in the tanks, but with no air support and mountainous terrain, they struggled. I decided instead to get military access from Serbia and use the tanks to help them. On flat terrain, the tanks performed much better, but I had to delete 2 of them because I didn't have enough stockpiled tanks. Thankfully, losing 2 tank divisions didn't hurt our combat effectiveness. We cut off a bunch of Danubian troops in Austria. The Danubians were crippled, so we sent the infantry up north to defeat the last Danubian holdout in Prague. After Danubia surrendered, we had to split the land with the Second Balkan League. I thought I could get my claims and an Austrian puppet, but the Second Balkan League did me so insanely dirty at the peace deal. Although I got Tyrol and Trentino, I was snubbed out of my claims in Istria and only got the useless mountains of Austria, not enough to set up a sponsored regime. I was pissed. The Serbs and Greeks did us incredibly dirty, and I was not about to put up with that bullshit. I suddenly gained a vendetta against the Second Balkan League, vowing to ensure that the humiliation they inflicted on us would not be without severe consequences. While we prepared to go to war with the now very strong Second Balkan League, D'Annunzio got some secondary targets out of the way first, to keep nationalists at bay until we finally declared war on the Balkans. First, Switzerland. They were a bit of a challenge due to the mountainous terrain, but they were not equipped to fight a modern and determined army. Breaking through was going to take some time, so we did do some political reforms back home, such as embracing the values written by Nietzsche. Eventually, we did crack the Swiss defenses, mainly by moving around the mountains rather than straight through them in most places. We reached the last Swiss cities and forced them to surrender. We annexed the Italian-speaking region of Ticino and established the Swiss National State in the rest. Italy did have some colonies before it collapsed after the Great War. Not many compared to the other great powers of Europe, but still had some. Namely, Italy had Libya, Eritrea, and Somaliland. However, those lands have been retaken by local tribes after Italy collapsed, and they have been ruled by ethnic Africans since then. Although Italy is a highly progressive nation, both socially and politically, it is also very nationalist. D'Annunzio is a nationalist himself, but he doesn't really care for colonies. Rather, he wanted to focus on Europe. But knowing the general populace was as upset as him about the humiliation by the Second Balkan League, he needed to wage a quick war that could be easily won. Libya was the best choice, having not been seized by France or Egypt. D'Annunzio announced a military occupation to reoccupy Libya. Since the fall of the Kingdom of Italy, Libya had been retaken by 3 local tribes. They're all incredibly weak, so D'Annunzio was confident the war would be a victory. We had to do an amphibious landing, but our marines were more than ready to invade Libya. We did raise some worker battalions while the landing was prepared, but they were garbage, so they were never used. The plan to land in Tripoli was ready, so the invasion was launched. The Marines secured the city, and soon after, Tripolitania surrendered. We moved in some infantry to handle the front while the Marines prepared to land in Cyrenaica. We needed the downtime anyway because the old Kingdom of Italy never properly built up Libya, as seen by the fact that there are no fucking railways, so we had to build some ourselves. While we fully stabilized the home front, we also fully pacified the other 2 tribes in Libya. However, D'Annunzio didn't really care for an overseas colonial empire. Rather, once we completed the new railway network in Libya, he signed the Treaty of Tripoli, establishing the Arab Republic of Libya in the occupied lands, so his ideas could be safely spread to Africa. Libya does have some plans of its own, but it can largely function by itself, with D'Annunzio only needing to supervise. This means D'Annunzio can fully focus on the Balkans, the biggest target of the Italian Social Republic. The last preparations are underway, namely more divisions and other operations to be carried out during the war. After we sent some material aid to Libya to help them build an army, D'Annunzio finally decided that the Italian Social Republic was ready to get revenge on the Second Balkan League and to fulfill Italian irredentism. The spirit of the Roman Empire has never left, and it will be renewed as we go on to March. On August 1st, 1930, Gabriele D'Annunzio declared war on the Second Balkan League, initiating the Great Balkan War. This war was not going to be an easy one. The Second Balkan League, after the fall of Danubia, had become very strong, with the combined armies of Serbia and Greece being ready to fight alongside each other like they did during the Great War. This was our only chance to fulfill Italian irredentism, and the strong legions of Italy would defeat the Balkan League on their own. We could have had a much easier war on our hands if we joined France's faction, but no one will undermine us. We will claim our place in Europe. D'Annunzio knew from the Great War and the first invasion of Austria that fighting in the Alps when stacked against so many enemy troops who were expecting an invasion would be suicide. So before the war had begun, he ordered the Marines to prepare an invasion of the port of Zara. We had an infantry army ready to reinforce the Marines once they landed. The attack on the port succeeded, so we sent in the infantry to reinforce while the Marines spread out. We also sent in the tanks to assist the invasion. At first, the Zara front went well, and we rapidly gained ground while the Alpine front remained a stalemate. I decided to try connecting the Zara front to the Alpine front with my tanks, so I began pushing north. I made good progress, however, this caused the Zara front to get too big, and I didn't have enough reinforcements yet. The Balkan League still had the numerical advantage, so they were able to halt my offensive in Croatia. I pulled back the Marines to prepare another invasion. Although I sent in 24 more units to the Zara front, it began to collapse. The Balkan League relentlessly attacked my units. I could try the last stand, but this was unsustainable. I made the difficult decision to evacuate my troops from the Zara front and, for a while, just defend in the Alps. The withdrawal from Zara was nerve-wracking, since 48 divisions were supposedly there on paper. Some of them were on the Alpine front for whatever reason, but there were still a lot of units on the Zara front I could not afford to lose. The retreat was very carefully executed, and despite losing a tank and some Marines during the initial Balkan counteroffensive, the 48 infantry divisions meant for Zara were all safely evacuated. While we simply defended on the Alpine front after a failed offensive, I tried using the remaining Marine divisions to open up a new front. I assumed the port in southern Albania would be an easy landing, but I was wrong. It was much better defended than I had anticipated, so the attack failed. I knew we needed to do another amphibious invasion because the Balkan League was not giving my troops a moment to rest. It was to their detriment since they had less recruitable manpower and stockpiled equipment than me, but they kept up the attacks. I wasn't sure if I was ready for another attempt at a landing in Zara though, so instead I decided to use them to hit the Balkan League with a backhand blow. 24 of the divisions that fought in Zara were redeployed to the main front to alleviate the pressure it was facing. While they were moving over, I deployed 6 more Marine divisions and ordered them to launch a naval invasion of the coastal town of Pula, as I believed a landing there could break the stalemate in the Alps. The invasion of Pula went pretty well. The Balkan League hardly defended the port, allowing the 9 Marine divisions to capture it. As soon as the port was captured, I sent in the tanks to aid the Marines in the offensive. The goal was to capture Gaffers and cut off the divisions near the town. The attack worked, and several Balkan divisions were encircled and destroyed. We even captured a Greek general. We tried to utilize the momentum to seize Rijeka, or as it's known in Italy, Fiume. Unfortunately, the Balkan League could reinforce the town continuously, stopping us from capturing the city. So although the landing at Pula did widen the front a bit, the Alpine front is still a stalemate. For that reason, I consider the Pula invasion only a partial success. On the bright side, the tide of the war is turning against the Second Balkan League. Although the Serbs were content with the extent of their sphere, the overzealous Greeks still wanted more despite occupying all of Anatolia. They declared war on Syria, opening the Levantine front. That is probably the stupidest thing they could have done, as although the Balkan League's members are strong, they cannot sustain long-term wars due to lower manpower reserves. They have lost 3 million men combined by now, and their casualties are only going to rise as the war continues. Although the tide was turning against the Second Balkan League, we still had a long way to go until we won. Because the Alpine front was still a stalemate despite the high Balkan casualties, I decided to do a second naval invasion of Zara. I noticed by now that the Balkan divisions were getting low on strength, either from a lack of manpower, equipment, or both. So I figured I could actually sustain the Zara front this time and not get pushed out. While preparing the invasion, I did make a small advancement on the main front by cutting off the island of Kres and destroying the units on the island. but it was not nearly enough to break the stalemate. The landing went well. I secured the port and reinforced it with 24 infantry divisions. The Balkan divisions were quite tired, so I was able to cut off Rijeka and pacify its defenders. This blew the front wide open, and I was not going to sit around and let the Balkans reorganize. I used the momentum to capture Zagreb, a key regional city and supply hub. The stalemate had now been truly broken. The Balkan League could no longer sustain prolonged conflict with the Italian Social Republic, allowing us to advance against the Balkan troops and get pockets of their soldiers. I could finally see the light at the end of the tunnel. I brought my tanks over to the front to launch an offensive. I wasn't going for some dinky little supply hub though. I had my eyes on the Serbian capital of Belgrade. The armor shredded whatever the Balkans put ahead of them, and we captured Belgrade. Later that same month, we stormed Budapest, the capital of Serbia's military government in Danubia. This is a huge blow to the Serbian sphere, which is now starting to crumble. With the end of the war in sight, we no longer have to hunker down and endure suicide charge after suicide charge. We will march forward and spread progressivism, nationalism, and corporatism to every inch of the Balkans, all while fulfilling Italian irredentism.
I won't be coming home, I won't be going anywhere, I will guard this post forever. Slope, where I did my final stand, I shall remain among the ice and snow that binds me to this mountain. A force of nature too strong, sent from above, where spirits lead the way, the wings will never fade. White Friday, I'll take the stairway to heaven. On sky high, when I die, I'll be immortal. I won't return to Blood Mountain. I am the soldier of heaven. I saw the end of war. I watched the soldiers come and go, and I kept my watch forever.
After 3 years, the Great Balkan War has come to an end. Millions of lives were lost. 7.58 million soldiers of the Second Balkan League lost their lives. However, we suffered a lot of casualties ourselves, facing 1.78 million in total. But in the end, the Italian Social Republic and the Popular League came out on top, ending the war after the third fall of Constantinople. We occupied the entirety of the Balkan League in Europe and Izmir, but Greece's other Anatolian holdings were seized by Soviet Turkey. D'Annunzio does not care about Turkey. For all he cares, Turkey can have their old land back. But what about the Balkans? Italy can't just occupy all of it forever. D'Annunzio always planned on establishing sponsored regimes in the Balkans. He maintained direct Italian control of the Dalmatian coast to fulfill Italian irredentism, while establishing sponsored revolutionary regimes everywhere else. Austria, Croatia, Bosnia, Albania, Bulgaria, Serbia, and Greece were all restored, but under regimes favorable to us. We also divided Serbia's military government in Danubia into 3 governments: Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Romania. With that, D'Annunzio can consider his vision achieved. Now that the war is won, though, he has begun to think. You'd expect him to be partying hard after his huge victory, but he wasn't. And it was for one simple reason. It was now 1933, and D'Annunzio was 69 years old. He was old, and he knew it. As he got older, he realized his time on Earth was running out, and Italy would need to survive without him. He concluded that instead of being ruler for life, he would instead resign and appoint a successor. However, he wanted to make sure future leadership changes would be stable, and that the Arengo wouldn't collapse. So he introduced party democracy, and finalized the 4 factions of the party. That was the main stuff he needed to do, and all that was left was to choose a successor. In the end, he chose Guido Keller to succeed him. Both possible successors were surprised by D'Annunzio's resignation, but they honored his wishes, and Keller would become the new leader of Italy. With that, this path has come to a close. You know, when I started writing this script, I didn't think it would get as long as it has, However, this path is unironically one of the best in the mod. I'm not just saying that because I made the trailer for the update. I think D'Annunzio's path for the Legion is one of the best paths that Collapsing World has to offer. I did skip over the events because I don't care for reading, but they are really cool. I highly recommend you check out this path, as it is undoubtedly the best one the Legion has to offer. Anyway, now you've got your answers, buddy. You know the true story of the boss's homeland better than any schmuck on the street. If you got anything to say, now you can say it. If not, we're gonna toss you out onto the street like you was never here. Now, anything to say?
Bruh, I just wanted some cocaine.